Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a really incredible place, Algeria. It's the absolute largest country in Africa, and honestly, its sheer size is only matched by its incredibly deep history. We're going to explore how wave after wave of conquest, some fiercely stubborn resistance, and deep cultural blending basically forged the modern Algerian identity we see today. It is a massive story of survival, of adaptation, and an absolute relentless quest for sovereignty.
To wrap our heads around this complex nation, we'll follow a quick six-part roadmap. First up, ancient roots and empires. 2, the French colonial era. 3, the War of Independence. 4, independence and civil conflict. Number 5, modern politics and economy. And finally, Section 6, a complex cultural mosaic. Let's get into it.
Part 1, ancient roots and empires, the first inhabitants and invaders. To really understand Algeria, we have to start at the very bedrock of its society, way back with populations that were thriving here around 7500 BC.
So that bedrock, it begins with the indigenous Berber populations. Now, they actually refer to themselves as the Amazigan, which beautifully translates to free men. I want you to keep that phrase in the back of your mind, because this core identity of being free men sets up this massive theme of resistance that literally echoes through thousands of years of this region's history. These were sedentary and semi-nomadic folks doing agriculture, animal husbandry, and they built a really rich civilization long before any foreign powers ever showed up on their shores.
And man, if there's one thing this land has seen, it is waves of empires. The sweep of this history is just staggering. From those Neolithic origins, we suddenly jump to Roman intervention in 250 BC. Then, you've got the seismic shift of the Arab-Islamic conquest in the 7th century. Fast forward to 1516, the famous corsair Barbarossa actually brings the region under the Ottoman Empire. And then finally, the devastating French invasion in 1830. It's like a revolving door of conquerors, and every single one of them left a permanent mark on the land.
But here's the thing. Despite all those endless invasions, the Berbers were absolute masters of resistance and adaptation. I mean, they fought the Arab armies fiercely, striking from the mountains under the cover of night. But over time, this really profound synthesis happened. History actually shows us that the Berbers might have temporarily displaced the Arabs politically during the Middle Ages, but ultimately they absorbed the Islamic faith and the Arabic language, just weaving them completely into the enduring fabric of Algerian identity.
Okay, moving to part 2, the French colonial era, a society fractured. In 1830, a totally new era kicked off, one that violently disrupted that historical continuity and tried to just rewrite Algerian identity altogether.
Just imagine a colonial occupation lasting 130 years. That is multiple generations born, raised, and dying entirely under foreign control. By 1848, France didn't even treat Algeria like some distant colony. They officially incorporated it as a literal French department. You had this massive influx of European settlers sweeping in to seize the prime agricultural land and the economy, while the indigenous Muslim population was pushed aside to a deeply marginalized secondary status in their own backyard.
And this created a total collision course between two clashing realities. On one side, you've got a rigid colonial administration pushing hard for total assimilation, forcing education and administration into French, suppressing Islamic knowledge. But in direct defiance to that, an inevitable reaction was brewing, a quiet yet incredibly powerful storm of indigenous nationalism. Algerian society basically worked around the clock to preserve their Arab-Berber heritage and demanded basic political rights against a system that was fundamentally built to erase them. In that tension, it finally snapped right around World War II. During the war, over 100,000 Algerians courageously fought for France, and, quite naturally, in return for their blood and their loyalty, they expected some basic civil liberties. Instead, peaceful protests for those exact rights in May 1945 ended in horrific massacres in towns like Sidif and Guelma. Thousands of Muslims were killed by French authorities. In that single moment, any lingering illusion of peaceful reform was just completely shattered.
Which brings us to part 3, the War of Independence, the fight for sovereignty. Unsurprisingly, all that boiling frustration finally ignited one of the most dramatic, poignant freedom struggles in modern history.
On November 1st, 1954, the National Liberation Front, or the FLN, launched a highly coordinated revolution, and their strategy was both brilliant and brutal. They used sudden urban sabotage and fierce mountain guerrilla warfare to basically exhaust a vastly superior French military. Crucially, they also masterminded international diplomacy,
securing support from the Third World, places like Vietnam and China, which turned their fight into a massive global anti-colonial symbol. France's response? Well, it involved mass detentions and forced relocations over 8 devastating years of conflict.
We really have to take a moment to observe the immense human cost of this war. Now, exact numbers remain heavily debated, but hundreds of thousands of Algerians lost their lives. This birthed a really deep national culture of trauma that has heavily influenced Algerian art and identity for generations. It also left the FLN as the sole, unchallenged ruling force of the newly independent republic when they finally won in 1962, which, as we'll see, set a pretty dangerous stage for the future.
That leads us to Part 4, Independence and Civil Conflict, the Dark Years. Let's dive into this post-independence era, a time when the sheer euphoria of freedom eventually collapsed into a really devastating internal struggle for the soul of the nation.
So how exactly does a promising shift toward democracy collapse so quickly? Well, it happened in 4 pretty tragic steps. Step 1, severe economic issues spark massive protests in 1988, which basically forces the one-party state to allow multi-party elections. Step 2, the Islamic Salvation Front actually wins a majority in the 1991 first round of voting. Step 3, terrified of a religious fundamentalist takeover, the secular military elite abruptly steps in and cancels the elections. And that instantly triggers Step 4, a violent, zero-sum armed conflict between state forces and Islamist militias.
Tragically, this civil war in the 1990s became widely known as the Black Decade. It claimed up to 150,000 victims. And the brutality really came from all sides of the political divide. Massacres, disappearances, urban bombings. It completely fractured the society. It remains a profoundly dark chapter in modern Algerian history.
Moving on to Part 5, Modern Politics and Economy, Wealth and Unrest. As Algeria moved into the 21st century, it emerged from the violence of the 90s, but found itself grappling with systemic corruption and a deeply unbalanced economy.
You see, Algeria's modern economy is defined by a massive paradox. When you break it down, on one side it's got incredible hydrocarbon wealth. Oil exports fund massive state infrastructure and account for half of Africa's entire GDP tied to oil. But there's a serious hidden cost. Relying completely on oil and gas wealth creates what economists call a rentier state. It is basically a glittering facade that masks incredibly high unemployment, steep regional inequality, and neglected social utilities. And the very second global oil prices crash, the entire system starts to shake.
And when you combine that severe economic stagnation with a complete lack of a civic voice, you eventually hit a breaking point. In 2019, a massive, youth-led demographic poured into the streets in the peaceful Hirak movement. They were demanding radical regime change, specifically targeting a political system they viewed as just a corrupt remnant of the old military alliance. It's a really powerful modern testament to that enduring Algerian spirit, the literal descendants of those free men, demanding a true democratic voice.
Finally, Part 6, a complex cultural mosaic, language and legacy. Because to truly grasp Algeria today, we have to look at how thousands of years of shifting powers have created this beautifully intricate, multi-layered society.
As a direct result of all this history, Algeria is a massively multilingual country. Arabic serves as the dominant state language, but then you also have Tamazight, the indigenous Berber language still spoken incredibly proudly in regions like Kabylie. Then there's French, an undeniable colonial legacy that's still widely used in business and administration. And now, increasingly, English is rising up as a modern push toward globalization. Daily life over there requires constantly navigating this wild tension and harmony between all these distinct identities.
It's exactly like a giant, complex puzzle. Everything in Algeria is a synthesis of all who have ever passed through. You can literally hear it in the rhythmic drum beats of Chabi music, which perfectly blends Berber oral traditions with Andalusian melodies. You physically see it in the breathtaking Roman ruins of Tipaza, or the deep architectural influences of Ottoman rule winding through the streets of Algiers. And you witness it every single day in the ongoing cultural struggle to reclaim a proud Arabic and Islamic identity, all while still navigating that lingering French footprint.
Which brings us to the end. And I want to leave you with this final thought. Algeria is, above all else, a country defined by survival. From the ancient Imazigan to the revolutionaries of the FLN, all the way to the peaceful protesters of the Hirak movement today. As Algeria navigates its political and economic future, its absolute greatest challenge, and honestly probably its greatest strength, remains uniting its incredibly diverse, traumatized, yet fiercely resilient history into a cohesive identity for the 21st century.
So, what do you think their next chapter looks like? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a whole new perspective on this truly remarkable part of the world.